What is an old trend that is still doing a lot damage and that people don't realize? Story 1 once had a job with what was called a no-fault policy. If you were late or absent 7 days in a year without prior notice, you were fired. Prior notice was a week's warning. If you were sick 2 days in a row, that's 2 points against you. If you were late because of an accident ahead of you on the highway, that was a point. If there was a blizzard and they closed the road, 1 point. I never got more than 3, but one lady whose kids were sick and in hospital racked up 3 points in a week. No fault meant not the company's fault you got fired. Edit. Story 2. Irresponsibly selective breeding dogs. People want their cute petite dog or their hard-looking pits while completely disregarding how their genetic deformities gives them a shit quality of life. A lot of these animals die relatively young, and if they miraculously do make it to old age, end up suffering horrendously as their issues become magnified. So much so that most of the assholes that want to have/breed these animals end up abandoning them or just neglecting them until they're incapable of powering through their struggles and die. Story 3. An 8 HR a day, 5-day-a-week work schedule still being the minimum expected standard for employees. That's supposed to be the maximum, as set forth by all the labor laws and guidelines from decades ago, not the bare minimum. COVID reminded and demonstrated just how unnecessary it is and how detrimental it is to society and worker health overall. Most people can complete their tasks, duties with an adjusted schedule that allowed more time at home. But alas, we cling heavily to tradition and old practices in this area. Story 4. Fitness and fad diets. Weights and resistance is great for any age. Kids especially. There's no evidence whatsoever of growth plate damage or abnormalities. Postmenopause. It's even more beneficial as it can help reduce the issues of osteoporosis by stimulating appositional growth and bone mineral density. The whole problem is down to such poor quality and misinformation from supposedly reputable sources. Fitness influencers are terrible, but even many doctors weigh in on it when it's outside of their specialism and abuse the respect they should rightly hold for what they are qualified to do. I work with lots of doctors in my particular field. GPs know fuck all about exercise and should absolutely not be prescribing any form of exercise plans or advice and should be signposting to specialists or qualified professionals. It's a different specialism, like most things in medicine, with its own very specific knowledge base. The whole industry is so poorly regulated, it's a shit show, and the general public are then bombarded with snake oil by grifters and don't know where to turn. Story 5. Diamonds. Diamond engagement rings only became a thing in the 1920s due to aggressive marketing by the De Beers diamond cartel. Diamond mining is often done under horrendous conditions, then most of them are locked away to keep the prices high. That $1,000 diamond ring is a lie. Diamonds are not actually that rare. Story 6. I have never understood how you can limit people's sick time or give it in advance. You may get poorly 3 times only in 1 year. We have sickness policies in the UK to stop people taking the piss. And as a non-NHS nurse, I don't get sick pay, but if I'm sick, and I'm going to be off for however long I need to be off. The US system is so bizarre. Story 7. More of a job-specific thing, but literally any tradesman that will argue that modern PPE is unnecessary. I don't care if your grandpappy used to use a paint sprayer without a respirator. I'm trying to not destroy my lungs. Work smarter. Putting yourself into an early grave to make shareholders, your boss happy is moronic. Story 8. A lot of old diets that were basically complete pseudoscientific nonsense are still being preached today as like the best way to lose weight. I truly believe one of the main contributors to America's obesity crisis is the fact that exercise, diet culture are filled with so much pseudoscience and just straight-up nonsense that it's almost impossible for the average person to figure out what actually does help them. The simple fact of the matter is that in terms of weight loss, the single and only way to lose weight is to put yourself into a calorie deficit. No avoiding special ingredients or eating specific foods is really going to matter unless you are achieving a calorie deficit. You could be eating nothing but raw, undressed salads your entire life and still get fat if you're not putting yourself into a calorie deficit. No, you don't need to specifically avoid carbs or certain fats or anything like that. You just need to eat less and eat less often. And whenever possible, try to seek out lower-calorie foods. Story 9. I'm in real estate. I see a new generation of realtors still saying, "You are wasting your money on rent," all while trying to sell houses to people who can't afford them. Yes, your mortgage will be roughly about what you are paying in rent, but you haven't taken into account that owning a house costs money and taxes. I have pulled more than a few aside and told them what they are doing is immoral. For those who don't know, the slogan, "You are wasting your money on rent," was created by the National Association of Realtors in the 80s to get renters to get into the housing market. It's a completely made-up statement that doesn't apply to everyone across the board. Sometimes it makes sense to rent, and some people are better off renting given their lifestyle choices. Story 10. A children's education system that refuses to accept the children develop at different speeds. Nearly all school systems in the world work on the basis that at a certain age a child should be able to do certain things, and if they can't, then that is seen as a problem. The reality, though, is that all children develop at different speeds. Some might struggle with reading longer than their peers, only for them to pick it up with no issues a year or two later. Having these artificial checkpoints is unhealthy for the children because it makes them think they are failing or deficient in some way, and at the same time causes stress and worry for their parents. In particular, it really harms undiagnosed neurodivergent children who can take news of their failure to heart more than over children do. Of course, you do need to test children every now and again to make sure they are developing, but the system needs to be more relaxed and more flexible to accommodate the fact that all children learn differently. Story 11. There's a webcomic where someone from the future comes back to experience our primitive way of life. He thinks cars that stay on the ground are hilarious. Everything is so low-tech and charming, it's all great to see and experience. Then someone offers him a can of Coke and he's horrified. What? No, of course not. Oh, yes, that's right. You still drink out of metal, don't you? It's everywhere. Even the pipes and the taps are metal. Dear God, it's everywhere. No, I shouldn't say anything. The timeline. But still, you're children. And that's it. There's no conclusion. Just leaves us hanging wondering what's so bad about drinking out of metal. Story 12. Lawns. Think about it. One plants a non-native plant, that is, doesn't contribute to the ecosystem, then must treat it with synthetic fertilizers, which hurt the soil and run off into our water supplies, and herbicides to keep those weeds away, leading to other harmful health and ecosystem side effects. You have to water it frequently. You must rake all the leaves off of it, harming nutrient cycling, soil building, and other things nature is trying to help you with and requiring use of even more fertilizer. And if you do it well, you have to mow it every 5-10 days and continue to toil away your time and money at this endeavor forever. Story 13. Expecting teachers to cater to your children. They were overwhelmed before 2020. Now, with a shortage and all, I still hear my friends with kids complain about how a teacher doesn't understand their child and acting all Karen to the administration. The poor teacher has 30+ other kids to manage and keep safe FFS. If your kids has special needs, harass the admin over a proper IEP and accommodations, not demand an underpaid and, likely, undertrained teacher to know exactly what to do for every child's ADHD or autistic meltdown or complete lack of cooperation. Story 14. This one's easy. Still believing that reality is controlled or manipulated by supernatural beings and designing our institutions based on that objectively insane belief. We had the fucking Dark Ages, learned nothing, and conservatives are still undermining mankind's progress. I'll give them this. Their very existence makes a strong argument for why we should slow down our technological growth, lest these idiots get homemade laser guns with infinite energy or some shit. They definitely would never use something like that to break our union apart. It's not like they're still flying the flags from the last time they attempted it or anything. That would be fucking crazy. What kind of idiot would allow that? Story 15. Using grades to judge a person's potential and determine their future. School should be about learning and developing interests and, more importantly, creating young adults who want to continue to learn on their own. Failing an art class shouldn't affect someone who wants to be an engineer, and failing math shouldn't affect somebody who wants to work in construction management. The whole school system should be improved and actually about learning, retaining information, as well as learning how to learn. Story 16. People thinking they should discharge and recharge their lithium-based batteries. That was good for nickel-cadmium, but lithium-based batteries should generally be exercised as little as possible. Keep your laptop and phone plugged in all day if you can. Yes, they live the longest when charged to 70%, but you can't generally keep a battery at 70%. So you're better off just keeping plugged in and only using battery when you have to. I can't tell you how many boomers are telling people to let their phones and laptops get down to 10% before plugging them in, and that's just absolutely awful for longevity of the batteries. Story 17. I live in Appalachia. People who are all zen and natural and at one with nature will hike to any of our rivers and balance a bunch of rocks which will, I don't know, increase their vibrations or something. Know what it does? It takes nature and turns it into a big sign that says, humans were here, which defeats the purpose of nature. Plus, we have critically endangered stream life around here that depends on some of those rocks for their habitat. Rooting around trying to find that perfect flat rock to make your chakra more whatever it needs to be harms the creatures that need the most protection. Stop balancing rocks into a pile on other rocks in the middle of a river. All it does is make you think how amazing and cool and different you are. Story 18. College loans. We're forgiving debts from years ago, but the current students have only experienced even higher exposure to debt. The GOVT caused the problem. Then their fix is to address the symptom for a small portion of the people that are affected by said problem, and they've done nothing to actually address the underlying disease. It's crazy. And people out there getting loans for $60K a year tuition at a mediocre university. Story 19. Answering questions from police when they just want to clear a few things up. They're questioning you because you are a suspect. Any answer you give will either be used to convict you or forgotten if it helps you. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Notice there's nothing there about helping you in a court of law. Just remember, the two main objectives of police are to generate revenue for the state and arrest people. Here in California, there was an illegal pot shop raided by police in Los Angeles. The police arrested all of the people working there. One guy answered no questions, while the other 5 answered questions. Guess which one was never charged? Story 20. Dominance-based dog training. It does way more harm than good. Dominance-based training is based on the debunked alpha wolf theory. In case you didn't know, the hierarchy of wolf status was created by studying wolves in captivity in the 1940s. The idea was popularized in 1970, when L. David Mech published a book on the ecology and behavior of wolves that included the concepts of alpha wolf theory. Not long after, he spent over 24 summers studying wolves on Ellesmere Island, where he was able to observe wolves that didn't fear people, and found that they aren't a collective of unrelated individuals that have to assert dominance over each other to obtain resources. In fact, wolves are a family unit. The so-called alpha male and female are a breeding pair, and most of the rest of the wolves are their children. The pack works cooperatively to raise those children, and when a wolf reaches sexual maturity, they will usually separate from the pack and find a mate to form their own pack. After finding out how wrong and damaging the alpha wolf theory was, Mech has been trying to get the book's publisher to remove it from the market, but the publisher refuses to do so. How does this relate to dog training? There are still tons of dog trainers out there who rely on outdated training methods that are based on the use of aversives in order to establish dominance over dogs. Decades of research into dog behavior shows that dogs benefit more from rewards-based, least intrusive, minimally aversive training methods. The use of aversives have been shown in many cases to create worse behavior and worse health outcomes for dogs. The reason being is that aversives tend to be used to suppress behavior rather than modify it. Suppressing behavior can lead to dogs finding alternate behaviors that can be equal or worse than the previous behavior, or can lead to an explosive negative reaction when the dog decides it doesn't want to suppress that behavior anymore. Many times, the methods used don't address the underlying conditions that could be causing difficulty in teaching a behavior, or that could be the root of undesirable behaviors, in a sense putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. Dog training works best when the dog trusts us and is allowed to make decisions on their own. When we ask them to do something and they decide to do the thing, we reward them. Rewarding good choices in a regular and consistent manner will lead to the dog making that decision more often, until the point where the behavior becomes second nature. By training this way, we build a relationship based on trust and communication rather than using force and fear, which will create either an antagonist relationship or a relationship based on your dog complying out of fear rather than choice. The problem is that people want quick results and magic bullets and don't want to put in the work or spend the money on professional trainers or, in the case of dogs with behavioral issues, animal behaviorists. As a professional trainer, I've encountered many clients who started training their dogs based on YouTube videos or using methods that they learned from non-trainers. I have also encountered people who came from other professional trainers that espoused dominance-based alpha dog methods, and now I have to help them undo the damage and help fix their relationship with their dog. Recently, the dog training community had to raise its voice after an internet personality who went by the name Dog Daddy started to achieve prominence. He was literally abusing dogs in front of crowds in order to make aggressive dogs comply with him. In many cases, he was working with dogs that had severe reactivity issues, inducing reactive behaviors from them and then choking and wrestling with them until they became docile. You'd think that after a few of those videos came out that people would run the other way, but he was being embraced and was drawing crowds. He even started an academy to train other trainers in his methods. Eventually, his methods were called into question, and people began to protest at his appearances, and even called authorities on him for animal abuse. He's since been denied entry in other countries where he was going to tour to try and spread his gospel. The disturbing thing is how many people jumped to his defense, saying that his methods were the only way to deal with dogs with those kind of issues. Even when it comes to dogs with aggressive behavior, we should try to avoid using aversives. A recent study on dogs with aggression issues showed how much better dogs who were treated with positive reinforcement-based methods fared versus dogs treated with aversive methods. A big thing that is always overlooked is how behaviors can be influenced by medical conditions. 15% of dogs in the study were found to have a medical condition that either created or exacerbated the aggressive behavior, and that once they were treated, the behavior subsided, and they were able to be trained more effectively to not have negative reactivity. If someone used dominance-based methods on these dogs, they would have continued to suffer under their medical malady. What we've found is, much like humans, a dog that is constantly stressed has a poorer quality of life and has a shortened lifespan. So if we're using tools that induce stress, fear, and pain to treat dogs that are already stressed out, fearful, and in pain, all we're doing is exacerbating the conditions instead of helping them. TLDR. Forget trying to be alpha or pack leader over your dog and follow modern training methods that don't rely on force or fear to train your dog. They'll live longer, be happier, and trust you more.